Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today with a bit of a scenario. Let's say it's 2 a.m. You were driving home. The streets are completely dead. I mean, just not a single soul in sight. You come to a red light. You stop. You wait. You look left. You look right. Nothing.
Ah, right. The classic ethical dilemma.
Right. And the question is, do you run the light? Now, before you answer, let's up the stakes a bit. You're on a bicycle. You have full visibility. There's absolutely zero danger of hurting anyone. And there's zero chance of getting caught. Why does it actually matter if you just go?
Well, I think most people would say it doesn't.
Right.
Pragmatically, the light is just a tool to manage traffic flow. So if there is no traffic, the tool is redundant. If you go, you save time, you hurt no one. It's just efficiency.
Exactly. Yeah. That is the very logical modern answer. No harm, no foul. But today, we are diving into a stack of sources that argues that this specific moment, that split-second decision to ignore the red light just because nobody is watching, is actually the first crack in the foundation of a civilization.
Which, I mean, it sounds incredibly dramatic when you put it that way, going from a simple traffic violation to the fall of Rome.
It really does. But the argument here isn't actually about traffic. It's about the psychology of constraint. Today, we're looking at a deep sociological and, well, psychological analysis of some very specific religious texts, specifically an exegesis of Surah al-Baqarah from the Quran, focusing on the work of the scholar Ghulam Ahmed Parwez. And his central thesis is terrifyingly simple. He argues that nations don't collapse because of massive wars or huge economic crashes. Those are just the final symptoms.
Right. The collapse actually happens much earlier. It happens in the mind. It happens when a society loses what he calls zab'i nafs.
Zab'i nafs. Let's unpack that term before we get into the case studies, because it really anchors everything we're going to talk about for the next hour or so.
Sure. So literally translated, it means self-restraint or self-discipline. But in this specific context, he isn't just talking about grit or working hard at the gym. It's about the ability to honor a collective agreement, even when it conflicts with your personal gain. And crucially, and this is the big part, even when no authority figure is there to enforce it.
So stopping at the red light, not because a police officer is sitting there in a cruiser, but because you implicitly agreed to live in a society where red means stop.
Precisely. If I only stop when there's a cop, I'm not disciplined, I'm just afraid. And the moment the cop leaves, I become chaotic. The source argues that a society filled with people who only obey out of fear is a society that is, frankly, already dead, just hasn't fallen over yet.
And this brings us to a concept from the text that I think is just a brilliant visual, the Rolling Stone momentum. It perfectly explains how things spiral out of control so fast.
Yeah, it's basically a concept from physics applied to human history. Imagine a massive boulder sitting at the very top of a mountain. It's completely stable. But if you nudge it just a tiny bit, it starts to roll. And at first, it's slow. You could probably just stop it with your hand.
That's the running the red light phase.
Right, that's the minor infraction. But as it rolls, it gains kinetic energy, it moves faster, it starts crushing things in its path. By the time it's halfway down the mountain, it's a complete juggernaut. No army can stop it. The source argues that the nudge is that initial loss of respect for minor laws. Once you normalize the idea that rules are for suckers or that rules are only for when people are watching, the stone is rolling.
And today, we are going to track that rolling stone through 3 distinct stages using the source material. We have a fascinating story about fishermen and a loophole. We have a story about a cow and the extreme danger of overthinking. And finally, we have a really powerful metaphor about a small shoe that explains why modern generations so often walk away from the faith of their parents.
These are essentially case studies in the decay of the human mind. And I want to be very clear to you listening, even though these are ancient stories involving Israelites, Moses, and religious laws, the analysis here is very secular in its application. It is fundamentally about human psychology. You are going to see yourself, your workplace, and your government in these stories.
Let's dive right into the first case study, the Sabbath. Now, most people know the absolute basics here. The Israelites were told to rest on Saturday.
Correct. But let's set the scene properly because historical context is everything. We are talking about a community living right by the sea. And this isn't a weekend hobby for them. They aren't sport fishermen. This is their absolute livelihood. If they don't catch fish, they don't eat. They have nothing to trade. They literally go hungry.
So the economic pressure is incredibly real. And they're given this law, you work 6 days. On the 7th day, the Sabbath, you stop. You completely disconnect. Absolutely no fishing.
Now, on the surface, this is a pretty standard religious discipline. It's about prioritizing the spiritual over the material. It's about showing that you are not just a slave to the economy. But the source material highlights this fascinating, almost biological consequence of this rule.
This is the part that reads straight like a nature documentary to me.
Hmm.
Because nature actually adapts, right?
It does. The text describes a scenario where, for a time, the fishermen actually followed the rule. They genuinely stopped fishing on Saturdays, and the ecosystem responded to that. The fish, being living creatures with survival instincts, realized that on Saturdays the water was completely safe.
I can just imagine this. 6 days a week, the fish are terrified. They stay deep. They hide out in the coral. Catching them is hard physical work. You have to be incredibly skilled.
Exactly. But on Saturday, the source says the fish began surfacing in abundance. They were swimming right near the top. They were playing. They were visibly jumping out of the water, completely unafraid of the shoreline.
Talk about a brutal test. Imagine you're a fisherman. You're standing on the shore on a Saturday morning. You're probably hungry, or you know you have debts to pay. And the water in front of you is literally boiling with fish. They are right there. You could basically scoop them up with a bucket, but you're absolutely not allowed to touch them.
And then on Sunday, when you are allowed to fish again, they're gone. They go right back to the deep water.
That feels almost cruel. It's like the universe is just openly mocking them.
It is the ultimate test of zapti-DMFs. Can you actually control your impulse? Can you stick to the contract you made with your creator, or even just with your community, even when the prophet is staring you right in the face and practically begging to be taken?
And, as we know from history and from the text, the answer was a resounding no. But, and I think this is the crucial twist here, they didn't just break the law. They didn't just say, you know what, screw it, we're fishing.
No, they didn't, because that would have been far too honest. If they had just walked out with their nets on a Saturday, that would be open rebellion. It would be a crime, sure, but it would be an honest crime. They wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted the fish, but they also desperately wanted to feel like good religious people.
So they invented the loophole.
The mechanism of the loophole they used is fascinating. The source mentions they used trickery or deception. Historical commentaries suggest they dug canals or reservoirs that were connected to the sea. On Friday evening, just before the Sabbath, they would open the sluice gates.
So the tide naturally comes in.
The tide comes in, bringing all those happy, safe Saturday fish right in with it. The fish swim into these artificial reservoirs. Then, as the sun sets and the Sabbath officially kicks in, they rig it so the fish can't get back out. Or maybe they place nets in such a way that the fish just accidentally got trapped.
And then Saturday passes. They sit at home, looking incredibly pious and resting. Look at us, keeping the Sabbath perfectly. And then Sunday morning rolls around.
They go down to the reservoir and they just collect the fish. And their argument, their sort of defense attorney logic is, hey, we didn't fish on Saturday. We didn't cast a single net. We didn't pull a line. The fish just happened to be there on Sunday.
It's the ultimate technically correct defense.
Right. Technically, they didn't break the rules of physical labor on the Sabbath, but they completely and utterly violated the actual purpose of the Sabbath.
Now, play devil's advocate for a second here. Why is this considered so much worse than just outright breaking the law? If the end result is exactly the same, the fish are dead, the rule is broken, why does the source material treat this specific trickery as the death knell of their entire society?
That is the most crucial question we can ask. If I break a law openly, I am still acknowledging the law's authority and I am admitting my own weakness. I say, I am a sinner. There is a certain humility in that. There's still a path to redemption because I am living in reality.
Okay, that makes sense. You know you did wrong.
But when I use a loophole, I am engaging in massive self-deception. I am convincing myself that I am still righteous while doing the wrong thing. I am destroying the very concept of trust. The source argues that this creates a split personality in the nation. You become a people who worship the form of the law while completely murdering the spirit of it.
It's basically the death of integrity.
And think about the betrayal of the fish, too. I know it sounds a bit poetic, but the fish trusted the peace of the Sabbath. The humans established a pattern of peace, and nature responded to it. By exploiting that trust, the humans showed that their word meant absolutely nothing. And a society where words mean nothing, where contracts are just puzzles to be solved and exploited, cannot function. It dissolves.
This leads us directly to a term in the text that I think is very often misunderstood, the apish mentality. Now, growing up or hearing these stories in Sunday school, you often hear that God literally turned these people into monkeys, like physically transformed them.
Right, the physical transformation punishment. And some traditional interpretations do hold that view. But the source we are looking at today, Parwez's work, takes a linguistic and highly psychological approach. The Arabic root qra'an does relate to apes, but he argues the Quran is actually describing a mental state, not a physical biology.
So they didn't grow fur and tails. Their minds devolved.
Exactly. Think about the primary characteristic of an ape in these types of analogies. It's mimicry. Ape see, ape do. An ape can copy a human action, it can wash clothes, it can smoke a cigarette if you hand it one, but it doesn't understand the meaning behind the action. It has absolutely no concept of the why.
So the apish mentality is what happens when a human being stops using their reason.
Yes, it is the total loss of oculoficar intellect and independent reflection. When the Israelites used those loopholes, they weren't thinking critically, they were just reacting to a stimulus. See fish, want fish, get fish. They bypassed the higher cognitive function that asks, is this right? What does this actually do to my soul?
And the source connects this heavily to blind imitation of other cultures too.
This is where it hits modern society incredibly hard. The source argues that when a people lose their internal discipline, that Sabbath discipline we talked about, they lose their ability to create. They become hollow inside. And what does a hollow person do? They mimic. They look at the dominant culture around them, the powerful nations, the trendy influencers, and they just blindly copy them.
That is savage. So a nation that cannot keep its own laws eventually just becomes a cargo cult. We just dress up like the successful nations and hope it works without ever understanding the underlying discipline that actually made them successful in the first place.
That is the rolling stone hitting the absolute bottom of the valley. The ultimate punishment for the apish mentality isn't turning into a monkey, it's subjugation. You lose your sovereignty. If you cannot rule yourself, you will inevitably be ruled by others. That is just a historical law.
So we have the Sabbath incident illustrating the loophole mentality, basically evading the law by being clever. But the source has a second case study that is almost the exact opposite. It's not about evading by being clever. It's about evading by being difficult.
Ah, yes, the story of the cow.
Right. Surah al-Baqarah. The entire longest chapter of the Quran is named after this specific story, so it's clearly central to the text. But on the surface, it is a really weird story.
It is. It reads like a detective story, a legal drama, and a bit of psychological horror all rolled into one.
Set the stage for us. What's happening?
A murder has occurred in the community, and nobody knows who did it. Tensions are incredibly high. Civil war is literally threatening to break out between the different tribes because everyone is blaming everyone else. They finally go to Moses and ask for a divine solution to find the killer. Moses prays, and the command comes down. Sacrifice a cow.
That's it. Just kill a cow. How does that solve a murder?
That was the exact command. Slaughter a cow. Ina Allahaya Murukum and Tath Bahu Bakara. It is incredibly indefinite. In Arabic grammar, the word Bakara used there is indefinite. It literally means any cow.
So just grab the first cow you see grazing, sacrifice it, and presumably the next step of the divine revelation will happen and the dispute is resolved.
Exactly. It was meant to be remarkably easy. It was meant to be a simple act of obedience to settle the community down and show submission, but they didn't do it.
Why not? I mean, they were an agrarian society. Cows weren't exactly rare.
They weren't rare at all, but the Israelites had a massive psychological problem. And to understand that problem, we have to look backwards. We have to go back to Egypt. We have to look at the 400 years of slavery they had just escaped from.
This is the part that is usually skipped in the simplified Sunday school versions of the story. We always think of slavery as just physical labor-building monuments, making bricks in the mud.
But physical slavery is actually the least of it. The worst, most lasting damage is the mental slavery. When you live under a dominant culture for 4 centuries, you internalize their values. You start to secretly believe that their gods are the real gods, that their symbols are where true power lies.
And the Egyptians worshiped the cow.
Specifically, the Apis bull. Osiris was often represented by it. The cow was deeply sacred. It was a literal idol. So, the Israelites had physically left Egypt, but as the source says, the love of the calf was still drunk into their hearts. Subconsciously, they still revered the cow as a deity.
So when Moses says, kill a cow, he's not just asking for a community barbecue. He's asking them to kill their idol.
He is asking them to smash the hidden idol in their own subconscious. He is testing their ultimate loyalty. He's asking, are you truly free, or are you still mental slaves to Egypt?
And because they secretly still loved the idol, they couldn't bring themselves to do it. But, and here's that exact same pattern again, they couldn't just say no. You can't just look a prophet in the face and say no. So what did they do instead?
They stalled. They used the massive bureaucracy of clarification. They started asking questions. Moses, ask your Lord to make it clear to us. What exactly is this cow?
That feels so incredibly modern. It's exactly like when you give a clear instruction to a team at work that just doesn't want to do the project, and they come back with, well, can we define the scope a bit more? What are the specific deliverables we're looking at here?
Analysis paralysis used as a deliberate defense mechanism. So Moses goes back, and the answer comes down. She is a cow neither old nor young, of middle age.
Okay, now notice what just happened there. The field of any cow just got significantly smaller. Now it has to be middle-aged.
They did that entirely to themselves. They asked for restrictions, so a restriction was added, but they still don't want to do it, so they ask again. Ask your Lord to make clear to us, what is her color?
Now, this is getting dangerous. Color is a very specific detail.
And the answer is devastating. She is a yellow cow, bright in color, pleasing to the beholders.
Yellow, like a saffron yellow.
A deep, rich, almost golden yellow. Now think about it. How many cows are fully, uniformly golden yellow?
I don't think I've ever seen one. Not many.
Almost none. They have backed themselves into a severe corner. But they keep going. They just can't stop themselves. They ask again. Ask your Lord to make clear, what issue? For all cows look alike to us, they are asking for the specific status or job of the cow.
And what's the final nail in the coffin?
The revelation comes back. She is a cow not trained to till the soil or water the fields. Sound and completely without blemish.
So let's just recap the specs they've negotiated for themselves. They need a cow that is middle-aged, bright golden yellow, completely unblemished, and has never done a single day of work in its entire life.
Do you realize what they have just described to the letter?
The deepest bull.
Exactly. They have perfectly described the Egyptian god cow. The sacred bulls in Egypt were pampered. They were never allowed to be worked. They were chosen specifically for their unique color and beauty.
That is ironic on a Greek tragedy level.
It really is. By trying to avoid sacrificing any cow because of their secret love for the Egyptian idol, they forced themselves to go out, find the exact physical embodiment of that idol, paid a fortune for it, and sacrifice it.
They completely built their own trap.
They built their own trap. The source calls this the psychology of overcomplication. When we don't want to follow a core principle, we obsess over the details. We make the religion or the project or the diet, whatever it is, so complicated, so specific, so impossible to execute that we just become paralyzed.
It's so interesting to compare the two. In the Sabbath story, they were far too clever for their own good. In the cow story, they were far too thorough. But in both cases, the end goal was exactly the same. Avoid the spirit of the command.
Avoid the reality of Zabi Nafs. Avoid the incredibly hard work of actually changing who they were. They just wanted to remain comfortable in their old habits.
And this brings us to the third segment of the source material, which I actually think is the most relevant for anyone listening today who feels a deep disconnect with tradition. The source uses this cow story to pivot to a fascinating metaphor about a small shoe.
Yes, this is a brilliant analogy found in the text. It beautifully addresses the tension between principles and procedures.
Let's define those two terms first.
Universal principles are the why. They are eternal. Truth, justice, compassion, discipline. These things were true 5,000 years ago, and they will absolutely be true 5,000 years from now. They are the immovable core.
And procedures.
Procedures are the how. They are the specific practical methods used to implement those universal principles in a specific time, a specific geography, and a specific culture.
Give me a tangible example of that.
Okay. The principle is dental hygiene. You must keep your mouth clean to stay healthy. That's a universal good. The procedure in 7th century Arabia was to use a miswak, a specific type of twig from the arak tree. It has natural antibacterial properties. It was simply the best toothbrush available at the time.
Right. It worked perfectly for that era. It was natural and effective.
Now, fast forward to 2026. The principle of hygiene is still 100% valid, but the procedure. We have electric toothbrushes, fluoride toothpaste, water flossers. The problem arises when you confuse the procedure for the principle itself.
When you tell someone, if you aren't using this specific twig, you aren't actually religious.
Exactly. The metaphor that text uses is this. The society is a growing foot. It changes, it expands, it walks on different modern terrain. The rigid ritual or procedure is a shoe. When the foot is small, in the early stages of a civilization, the shoe fits perfectly. It protects the foot. But as the foot naturally grows, the society advances, discovers new science, changes its economic structure, that old shoe becomes extremely tight.
And if you just rigidly refuse to change the shoe.
The foot hurts, it gets blisters, it alters how you walk, eventually it gets gangrene. The source argues that we have done exactly this to religion. We have taken the temporary details of previous centuries, the yellow cow details, if you will, and we have frozen them into eternal, unchangeable law. We have said, this specific cut of beard, this specific length of a robe, this specific way of sitting on the floor, this is the religion.
We've created a small shoe.
And now we look at the youth. The youth are the growing foot of the modern world. They try to put on the shoe that we hand them, and it physically and mentally hurts. It doesn't fit their reality. It contradicts what they know about science or sociology or modern human rights.
So what do they do when the shoe hurts too much?
This is the real tragedy. Because they have been taught their whole lives that the shoe is the religion, when the shoe doesn't fit, they don't just go buy a bigger shoe. They decide, well, I must not be made for walking, or I must just not be religious, and they throw the whole thing away.
They abandon the eternal principles entirely just because the specific procedures were painful.
Correct. They walk away from truth, justice, and community because those things were wrapped up in a package that felt completely obsolete. The source argues this is entirely our fault, the fault of the religious scholars, the institutions, the older generation for engaging in that cow psychology. We overcomplicated the faith until it became an unbearable burden.
It's honestly heartbreaking when you think about it that way. We have prioritized the yellow color over the actual sacrifice. We've prioritized the twig over the clean mouth.
And then we sit around and wonder why the youth are leaving in droves. They aren't leaving God. They're fleeing a system that suffocates their reason. They're flat out refusing to have an apish mentality. In a strange way, their rejection is actually a sign of mental health. They are refusing to just blindly mimic something that fundamentally doesn't make sense to them anymore.
That is a highly provocative take. You're saying the atheism or the agnosticism of the modern youth might actually be a form of deep honesty.
It's a direct reaction to the dishonesty of their elders. If the elders are using loopholes like the Sabbath fishermen or obsessing over trivial details like the color of the cow while the actual world burns, the youth look at that hypocrisy and say, this is a scam, I'm out.
So how do we possibly fix this? We have diagnosed the cancer. We've seen the rolling stone at the bottom of the hill crushing everything. The final segment of our deep dive today is looking at the path to reform outlined in the text.
The source is very blunt here. It says you absolutely cannot fix this with force.
Which is always society's knee-jerk reaction, right? Banning things, more police on the streets, stricter religious laws.
None of that works. If the Zabinafs, that internal restraint, is gone, external restraint is completely useless. You can put an armed cop on every single corner, but the absolute second the power goes out, the city will loot itself.
So where does the actual repair begin, if not with the law?
It begins with rational education. And notice the very specific word there, rational, not dogmatic.
What's the fundamental difference between the two in this context?
Dogmatic education says, do this because I said so, or do this because you will go to hell if you don't. Rational education says, do this because it is true and it works. Let's look at the evidence together. Let's look at the historical cause and effect.
It appeals directly to the human intellect.
Yes. The source argues we need to systematically deconstruct the hidden idols. We need to take the youth, and frankly, ourselves, into a kind of mental surgery. We need to bravely ask, why do I actually believe this? Is this a universal, eternal principle? Or is this just a cultural habit my ancestors picked up along the way?
That requires a massive amount of courage. It's terrifying to question the foundations of your own worldview.
It is terrifying. But remember the concept of the clean slate from the Exodus story. The source mentions that the specific generation that came out of Egypt, the ones who constantly argued about the cows, they were essentially a lost cause. They had to wander in the desert for 40 years until that entire generation died out.
Wait, really? That's the meaning behind the 40 years wandering in the desert story. I always just thought that was a divine punishment. Like, you were bad, so now you get to be lost.
No, it wasn't just arbitrary punishment. It was a sociological necessity. You cannot build a new free nation with people who still have the internalized minds of slaves. You have to wait for the new generation, the ones born in the harsh reality of the desert, the ones who never saw the Apis bull, who never bowed down to Pharaoh. They were the ones with the clean slate. They were the only ones who could actually enter the promised land and build something new.
So the intense focus has to be on the next generation. We might be too messed up, too set in our rigid procedures to fix ourselves completely, but we can at least stop passing the small shoe down to our kids.
Exactly. We can give them the core principles. We can give them the why. And we have to trust them to figure out the how for their own unique time and place.
That requires letting go of a lot of control. It requires a lot of trust.
It does. But the alternative is cultural extinction. The alternative is the rolling stone crushing everything until there is nothing left.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. From a simple traffic light at 2 a.m. to the psychology of ancient Israel to the crisis of modern faith and the youth, it is a lot to process.
It is a lot. But if you strip away all the historical context, it really all comes down to one single thing: authenticity.
Authentis.
Are you real? Is your discipline real? Or is it just a show for the neighbors? Is your faith real, or is it just a comfortable habit? Is your shoe actually fitting your foot?
I want to leave the listener with a final thought to carry into their week. We promised a provocative question at the top of the show.
We did, and I want everyone listening to really look in the mirror for this one.
Okay, let's hear it.
We all have a cow in our lives. There is something simple that we know deep down we need to do. Maybe it's a difficult apology we need to make. Maybe it's a destructive habit we need to quit. Maybe it's a massive career change we've been putting off. The command is simple: sacrifice the cow.
But we aren't doing it.
We aren't doing it. Instead, we are asking endless questions. We are researching it to death. We are preparing. We are buying the perfect gear for the hobby we haven't started. We are fiercely arguing about the exact color of the change instead of just making the change.
So the question to you is, what is the cow you are overcomplicating right now just to avoid sacrificing it?
And secondly, where in your life are you acting exactly like those Sabbath fishermen? Where have you convinced yourself that finding a clever loophole is the exact same thing as having integrity?
Oof, that's a tough one to sit with. You know, telling yourself, I'm not lying, I'm just omitting key details. Or I'm not stealing, I'm just creatively expensing it.
It always starts right there. It starts with the traffic light.
It really, really does. This has been heavy, but absolutely necessary.
The deep dive is rarely about light swimming in the shallows.
Very true. To our listeners, thank you for trusting us with your time and your attention today. We hope this sparked something real for you. Don't just mimic what you heard today. Genuinely think about it. Use your akal.
And maybe, just maybe, actually stop at the red light tonight, even if the streets are completely empty.
Especially if the streets are empty, because that is exactly when it counts the most. Thanks for listening. We will see you in the next one.